I had a comment in one of my videos that said this individual was only able to ride about 200 meters or so before they got tired, mostly because they weren't comfortable in their seat. And that contributed to them being tired after a relatively short period of time riding. And this is not an uncommon problem. Double negative. This is a common problem. In this video, let's talk about the seat and getting comfortable with it. First, let's talk about why this happens. Getting comfortable in the seat is not necessarily a physical limitation and more of a mental one. But just like with anything, if you're starting off something, you don't trust it. I don't trust strangers, probably because I live in Chicago. Well, actually, I do trust strangers, but you shouldn't.
Hello.
So long story short, you don't trust the unicycle to take your weight. You're gonna put all the weight in your legs because you trust your legs more than you trust the unicycle saddle. You probably just learned how to ride the thing by putting your weight onto your right leg and your left leg, and your right leg and your left leg, and only those two things. So why would you introduce another variable that can potentially go awry by putting your weight on the seat as well? That's another third point of failure, and you'd probably be much more comfortable just putting your weight on your left and your right foot. This makes complete sense, and you're not doing anything a reasonable person wouldn't do in your situation. But it probably is limiting you on how far you can ride, because eventually you'll get tired of your legs holding up all your weight rather than the actual unicycle saddle. Another reason you might not be comfortable in the seat is because it's not comfortable. A unicycle saddle is small, it's barely cushioned, and it's oriented in a spot where you would probably think twice before putting anything there. It's probably why you don't see gaming chairs and couches made out of unicycle saddles. What's probably more comfortable, since you're doing something active already, is not sitting down at all, because you're not comfortable in the saddle because the saddle's not comfortable. Again, this might be limiting you on how far you can ride and how comfortable you are on the unicycle in general. The last and more personal reason for not getting comfortable in the seat is chafing or any uncomfortable rubbing. Comparing a saddle to a bicycle seat is more narrow at the tip. This makes sense because when riding a bicycle, your thighs are more horizontal, almost like you're sitting in a chair. Yet a unicycle saddle is not narrow at the tip and instead narrow towards the center. This is because on a bicycle, where your feet should go on the pedals is typically slightly ahead of the seat, but on a unicycle, the pedals are directly below the saddle, so your thighs should be more vertical because you're going to be more upright. This also may be where people get into trouble as they try to ride a unicycle like a bike. A unicycle is not a bicycle, and you should be a lot more upright riding on one wheel than two, which is why your thighs should be more vertical, not horizontal. If they're more horizontal, they would rub against the front wide part of the saddle. Additionally, chafing can occur when you're just straight up too far out of the saddle. The higher out of the saddle you are, the more movement that happens with your thigh and your seat. My wrist is covering a much longer distance than my elbow right now because it's farther away from my joint, which is my shoulder. That being said, the part of my thigh that makes contact with my seat, I would prefer it to be a lot closer to my joint, which is my hip, as opposed to farther down closer to my knee. So the farther away I get my hips from my seat by standing up is going to create more movement with my thigh against my seat compared to if I just sat down. So if you lower your hips, the movement that your thigh has against your saddle is going to be less, which results in less chafing. So if any one of those reasons sounds like it's something that's keeping you from getting comfortable in the seat, then addressing it in your own way is probably best. However, if none of those sound like you, I do have 2 tips you can try regardless. One of the easiest ways to fix this problem is going back to basics. Remember when you were first starting to ride and you had to use a wall or a fence to ride along? Well, do that again, except every so often, remind yourself, get back in the saddle. What sometimes I like to do is I like to see how far I can get out of the saddle and then see how far I can get in the saddle. And it makes me feel like I'm really putting all of my weight on the saddle once I come down. This tip is aimed at essentially teaching you how to re-ride while putting your weight somewhere other than your right and your left foot. Another tip you could try is stick your chest out. And I know this sounds trivial, but if I told you to be as tall or as upright as possible, that'll probably take you further off the saddle. But sticking your chest out makes your spine more erect without you being as far off the saddle as you possibly can. If you're not upright and you're slouching over, your unicycle frame won't be vertical. It'll be like this. So a lot of this part of the seat will be supporting you rather than all this cushion back here. If I slouch over, a lot of my frame is tilted and there's a lot of pressure on the front part of my hips. If I stick my chest out, I get to use my glutes to cushion, as well as more of the cushion on the actual saddle. So those are the tips of getting more comfortable in the seat. Really get into the saddle and keep your spine straight. If you have any thoughts, please let me know in the comments below, and consider subscribing if you want more unicycle content. Thanks and good luck.
Ow.